U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has apparently earned the support of enough delegates to secure the Democratic nomination, succeeding her current boss, Joe Biden, as the Democrats' presidential nominee in time for the November election. This is terrible news for Jews in America, especially those who consider themselves both Democrats and Zionists. Like Obama, Harris represents the growing progressive faction of the Democratic Party. And I'm not talking about the textbook definition of progressive, which includes noble aims like combating poverty, reduce inequality, and provide social safety nets. Harris is close with so-called pro-Palestinian progressives, who have aligned with Earth's most regressive, misogynistic, homophobic, anti-democratic, violent forces, Hamas. One of them, Rashida Tlaib, an American Palestinian congresswoman, held a black sign that said, "Guilty of genocide," as she watched Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to a joint session of Congress on Wednesday. Harris was notably absent from Netanyahu's speech. As vice president, Harris should have traditionally presided over a joint session involving a foreign leader's address. But instead, she was on the road in Indiana, opting not to change her pre-existing plans. One notable left-leaning media outlet described this move by Harris as an attempt to, quote, further solidify support from young, minority, and more progressive voters who polls show have been more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. And Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, recently said that Harris, quote, has a deep empathy for the situation of Palestinian Americans, adding that, quote, it's more natural to her. And let's not naively use her husband and token Jew, Doug Emhoff, as a reason to believe she is pro-Israel. His daughter Ella, from a previous marriage, joined a fundraiser for Gaza's Children to her Instagram page, which has 315,000 followers, even as it has been well documented that Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have charities posing as humanitarian organizations to circumvent international sanctions. Then, in December, Doug Emhoff took to social media to tell a completely inaccurate, politically manufactured story about Chanukah, writing, quote, in the Hanukkah story, the Jewish people were forced into hiding. No one thought they would survive, or that the few drops of oil they had would last. But they survived, and the oil kept burning. In these dark times, I think of that story. The actual story is that the Maccabees, a small band of Jewish fighters, liberated the land of Israel from the Syrian Greeks, who occupied it and sought to impose their Hellenistic culture, which many Jews found attractive. Harris herself has a questionable record with Israel. Just 3 weeks after the Hamas-led massacres in Israel, she announced that the Biden administration would develop, quote, the first ever U.S. national strategy to counter Islamophobia. That was less than 24 hours after the head of the FBI warned Congress that the U.S. is experiencing record high levels of anti-Semitism. Then, last Thursday, just a few days before President Biden dropped out of the presidential race, Doug Emhoff chaired an interfaith roundtable where he discussed the administration's plans to soon release new federal guidance on combating Islamophobia. All of this should be no surprise, though. In Egypt during 2009, Barack Obama, another progressive, gave a speech during his first year as president aimed at resetting U.S. relations with the Muslim world. He insisted that members of the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is an offshoot, be provided seats at the event, even though the Brotherhood was a banned organization in Egypt at the time, prompting then Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak to cancel his attendance, probably fearing for his life. Only a few months earlier, the Holy Land Foundation, a quasi-nonprofit organization designed to launder more money to terrorist organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood, was found via trial to be behind a Muslim Brotherhood plot to sabotage the U.S. while promoting Hamas's mission to destroy Israel. Obama administration officials went on to airbrush the Muslim Brotherhood, portraying fundamentalist radicals who seek to vanquish the West as, quote, largely secular moderates, with whom the U.S. government should be working cooperatively. What's more, We should ask ourselves why Obama went out of his way to coddle and court Qatar, the funder of ISIS and Hamas, modern nihilistic death cults dedicated to the killing of Christians, gays, and Jews. On Tuesday, Kamala Harris said that her presidential campaign is focused on two visions: the future of the nation and its past. We know what progressives mean when they talk about America's past: a vicious, subversive agenda that includes intersectionality, critical race theory, and the notorious oppressor-oppressed framework, in which the Jews are considered part of the so-called white oppressor, colonialist, racist class that must be lectured and punished. Thus, it is no surprise that the U.S. State Department, America's version of a foreign ministry under Obama and continuing into Biden's first presidential term, is increasingly anti-Israel. Not because the Jewish state is some rogue pariah nation that must be forcefully dealt with, but because Israel is considered a white oppressor, colonialist, racist entity by many folks who work in the State Department. This might also explain why roughly 70 Democrats from the House of Representatives and Senate boycotted Netanyahu's speech on Wednesday. One of these Democrats, Bernie Sanders, equating the democratically elected Israeli premier with an autocratic mega-terrorist, saying, quote, "I agree with both the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and the United Nations Independent Commission that both Benjamin Netanyahu and Yahya Sinwar are war criminals." American Jewish Congress President Daniel Rosen said that those who are skipping the speech to protest Netanyahu are in effect boycotting Israel. That sounds about right to me, unless these Democrats are only willing to support allies at a time of immense need when these allies are politically aligned with them. What great foreign relations! I grew up in a Democratic home in Los Angeles and still hold many quintessential Democratic, liberal values. But this is not the same Democratic Party that once was. It is quickly becoming a populist juggernaut that courts so-called people of color and commingles their historical narratives into a single thread, pitting them, the oppressed peoples, against white people, the so-called oppressors, which includes Jews. What makes this trend even more worrisome is that it is not easily detectable, but it has surely made its way into American institutions, such as education systems, academia, media, government, and NGOs. It is also why some of the most Democratic-run cities in America are the ones that tolerate overt anti-Semitism by so-called pro-Palestinian mobsters, who disguise their Jew hatred with quote-unquote advocacy for Hamas-run Palestine. A Kamala Harris presidency would amplify these trends on the national level, making Jews in America feel even less safe than they already do. Side note, I am sure there are plenty of pieces from Harris's agenda that would benefit the United States, but this platform is called Future of Jewish and not Future of America. This week, CNN anchor John King stated that Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro may not become Harris's running mate purely because Shapiro is Jewish, creating considerable consternation in some Jewish circles. During a discussion of possible vice presidential nominees with Anderson Cooper, King said of Shapiro, quote, "He's Jewish. There could be some risks in putting him on the ticket." Both King and CNN were criticized for this comment, but the criticism overlooked a very dark and disturbing fact. King was absolutely right. In other words, there is a great deal of risk for Harris to put a Jew on the Democratic presidential ticket. What King did not note was the reason why. The Democratic Party is now badly compromised by anti-Semitism. The red-green alliance between the quote-unquote progressive, left and Arab and Muslim anti-Semites is now a formidable portion of the Democratic Party. And electing Harris as the 47th U.S. president would make it even worse.